Hello students, welcome to this video tutorial on multiplying and dividing integers. Alright, let's start with the note. When multiplying or dividing integers, you only have to remember these four rules. So I've created a little table here to show the rules. Rule number 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's read across the first row. Rule number 1, the sign of the first integer. If we have a positive and we multiply it or we divide it by another positive integer, our result, the sign of the integer answer, is always going to be positive. So a positive times a positive equals a positive, or a positive divided by a positive equals a positive. So let's go to rule number 2. A positive times a negative, or positive divided by a negative, and the sign of the answer is always going to be negative. Rule number 3, if we have a negative integer multiplied by a positive integer, well, that's exactly rule number 2 except for reversed, isn't it? So we're also going to have a negative. And for rule number 4, if we have a negative times a negative or a negative divided by a negative, we're going to have a positive. So I want you to have a look at these rules, and then I want you to kind of come up with a rule on your own that will help you if you don't really understand or remember the rule. So if you notice that if the signs are the same, such as rule 1 or rule 4, see how this is a negative and a negative, and in rule 1 it's a positive and a positive, the result is always positive. But if the signs are different, if we have a positive and a negative, as in rule 2, or negative and a positive, as in rule 3, we're always going to get a negative answer. Okay? All right, so how do you use these rules? Well, here are the steps. Step number 1, first ignore all of the signs of the integers. Step number 2, solve the multiplication or division question. Step number 3, then use one of the four rules to determine the sign of the integer answer. And then number 4, our conclusion statement. All right, so let's go through our examples. Example 1, we have positive 6 times positive 2. Or if we were to write that in standard form, I would like you to kind of beat me to it here. So we have 6 times 2. Now, when we write it like this in standard form, the answer is so obvious. But let's use our steps here. So first, let's ignore all of the signs of the integers. So we're left with 6 times 2, which is an answer of 12. Okay, so that's step number 2. Solve the multiplication or division question. Step number 3, then use one of the four rules to determine the sign of the integer answer. So we get to use this fancy table here. So we have positive times a positive. So we look up here, and that's rule number 1. Positive times a positive equals, and the sign of the integer answer is positive 12. Okay? So when we write our therefore statement or our conclusion statement, at this point, you're getting so good with standard form that let's not even bother with the integer form. Let's just write our conclusion statement as standard form. Okay, let's go to example 2. We have negative 14 divided by negative 2. So I want you to beat me to it. I want you to write that in standard form. All right, so hopefully you came up with this in standard form, negative 14 without brackets divided by negative 2 with brackets. All right, so step number 1, first ignore all the signs of the integers. So we're left with 14 divided by 2. Step number 2, solve the division question. 14 divided by 2 is 7. Step 3, then use one of the four rules above to determine the sign of the integer answer. All right, so we have a negative divided by a negative. So what rule is that? So if we look on our table here, we have a negative divided by a negative. So that's rule number 4. the answer is going to be a positive. So we're going to put positive 7 here. Then, to get your full marks, I want a conclusion statement. So therefore, we're going to write it in standard form, negative 14 divided by bracket negative 2 equals, and then we'll lose the positive sign and just put 7. Our answer is positive 7. All right, let's go on to example 3. Negative 7 times positive 5. Okay, so first thing, let's rewrite this in standard form. So hopefully you came up with this question in standard form, negative 7 times 5. Okay, so let's go through the rules. Let's ignore the signs and let's just do the multiplication. 7 times 5 is 35. Then we look at the signs. We have a negative times a positive, a negative times a positive. So let's look in our table. What rule is that? Well, we're going to start with a negative here times a positive. So it looks like rule number 3, and our answer is going to have the sign of negative. So we put our sign in, so our answer is going to be negative 35. Therefore statement, we use our standard form, negative 7 times 5 equals negative 35. Okay. All right, let's go on to example 4. So hopefully this is, I hope this isn't too complicated and I hope you're getting it. So if you can stay ahead of me, that would be great. So example 4, we have positive 16 divided by negative 4. So first thing, I'd like you to rewrite the question in standard form. All right, so we got 16 divided by negative 4. So let's use our rules. Let's ignore the signs. We have 16 divided by 4. 16 divided by 4 is 4. And then we look at our signs. We have a positive divided by a negative. So let's go to our table here. A positive divided by a negative. That's rule number 2. And we come up with an answer that's going to have the sign of negative. So we place the negative here in our answer, and then we rewrite, actually we write our conclusion statements. So we use standard form. Okay, so the next few examples are very similar. So I'm going to leave those for you to do on your own, but we're going to jump down to example 9 and 10, and where we introduce a new thing here where we have exponents. Okay, so let's go to example 9. Negative 2 squared. Now we have to understand what that means. So negative 2 squared means negative 2 times negative 2. Now remember, it's not negative 2 times 2. It's negative 2 multiplied by itself twice. So as long as you understand that, as long as you remember that, then the rest is very easy. Okay, so if we ignore the signs, we have 2 times 2, which is 4. And then we have a negative times a negative. Now I can't see the chart anymore, but do you remember that rule? Negative times a negative. I think that's rule 4. A negative times a negative is going to give us a positive answer. So if we rewrite this question, we're going to have, sorry, we should, no, we have to write it in its form that we were given in the question, equals 4. Okay? So when you write your conclusion statement, don't use this. We only wrote this to remind ourselves what negative 2 squared means. Okay? So if we go to example 10, we have negative 3 to the power of 3. So do you remember what that means? That means negative 3 multiplied by itself 3 times. It does not mean negative 3 times 3. That is not correct. Okay? So this is the first time where we're actually multiplying or dividing more than 2 terms together or 2 numbers. So all I want you to do is I just want you to treat this as 2 different questions. So let's do the first part. Okay? Let's do this step first. So negative 3 times negative 3. Well, what is negative 3 times negative 3? Well, 3 times 3 is 9. And then a negative times a negative times a negative is positive. Okay, so now we have the answer for the first part of the question. So now we're going to do this part and this part. Okay, we're going to put this answer over here. So now we have positive 9 times negative 3. Positive 9 times negative 3. Well, 9 times 3 is 27. And then we have a positive times a negative. A positive times a negative, since the signs are different, we're going to have a negative answer, aren't we? So then when we write our conclusion statement, therefore, negative 3 to the power of 3 equals negative 27. So with this question, I gave you a really good hint on how to solve number 11. So what I want you to do is I want you to go back and provide the answers for 5, 6, 7, 8, and then I want you to try the challenging question number 11. When you've got those answers, please bring up your sheet to show Mr. Ueda. All right, thanks for watching. Bye.